So, welcome to the Star Wars Collectors Archive podcast. Steve, it may be playing some like really annoying sound right now. I think I have to turn this off. This is our intro. So you didn't hear that on your side.
No, it's all good here. So
Okay. Well, it was this weird version I did of the intro that's not even synced properly. So, welcome to the Star Wars Collectors Archive podcast. I'm Sky Payne
yeah,
Fudd, and as always, with me is my temporary co-host Stephen B. Danley.
yeah. Here we are. We're still alive, right?
Yes, Steve is in his new house.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy. Like I feel like right when we get going, big life changes tend to come around. So here we are,
Yes.
and we're about we're on the horizon for more. But no,
Yep.
it's all good. This is what now we came back with 125. Now we're up to 126. We're at 128 now.
Hey,
So hey,
we're gonna make it right now. So we're gonna have Ron and Gus on here. And Chris,
yeah.
did we try to get Chris or he wasn't available?
I feel like we didn't try for this one. He wasn't on the last call, so I asked the two of them, and they were good with it. But we should definitely get Chris on if we do like a part two of this.
Yeah, well, I think we should. So I just
Yeah,
messaged Ron because he hasn't ever used Zoom. Man, charmed life.
that's wow.
Anyways, so this is so we've had a little bit of a break. I'm about to have my fourth child in like a couple weeks, anywhere from a week to a month. So this might be the last episode for a while, but who knows? We have some exciting stuff. We're hopefully going to
Yeah.
have a return to Obi-Wan and eventually some Max Rebo and Jabba. But what are we here to talk about? The last episode was Star Wars collecting has sucked recently, and this episode is no, it hasn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the best way to do that is just I think we talked about this when we started back up again, is that it's the archive's 30th, right? So yeah, that's a reason to be happy, celebrate.
Yeah, that I made all those points and I was trying to be a little provocative and not too provocative because this is Mr. Nice Guy. I'm a nice
Right.
guy again. I was actually on a different podcast called I've been meaning to listen to that, which is
Yeah.
my music thing. And
Yeah.
there was like four people on. And even though my personality on YouTube is very friendly, I slipped into podcast Sky and I was like totally roasting this one dude. And they were like,
It's all
what the
format driven. It's
and they
all
were like,
format driven. Yeah.
"What the hell?" I'm like, "I'm sorry, you just saw podcast Sky. I'm a different guy." So yeah, I've got this like lighting on me. So if you're just listening, you won't see, but it's making me look really shiny, doesn't it? Kind of.
You are
Anyways,
shiny, man.
I
You are a shiny diamond.
I am. And obviously, we're going to do an episode about all the vintage implications of the Acolyte. Um,
Right.
we're done, so we did it.
Yeah.
That was very fun.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Number
Great.
one,
Great show. Don't want to talk about it when it comes to
Yoda for a half second. Yeah.
yeah.
I will say this. I did actually call a different podcast and left a note.
Oh yeah.
Children of the Watch because they're
Oh
a
yeah.
pretty good
They're
podcast.
yeah.
So if you
Yeah.
what I want from that show is I want a what's that guy's name? Mog and Basil show. Like just the two of them, like Kenobi, Skywalker, Mog, Basil, just the pasty
Uh,
British dude. And yeah, that's what I want.
yeah. I'd sign up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then why don't we let in Ron and Gus as we get
Okay.
them? And also, I have like a whole PowerPoint that you sent me, which I won't do yet. We'll just let Ron
Okay.
in here, and we'll see if he gets on. We
Okay.
see his name there.
There he is.
Hey! Oh wait, he can't hear us though.
Uh,
This looks very mysterious.
you there, Ron?
Yep, can you hear me?
Hey. Yep.
Yeah.
Nice.
So we're already recording. That's the way we do it now. So because I decided I'm too cool
That's
to
good.
edit. So how's it going, Ron?
All right, how are you guys?
Great. We were,
Good.
we were getting all of our acolyte discussion out of the way, but I'm sure you
Before
have
you
a lot to
join.
say.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I only watched like the first episode or something. So not much to say.
Yeah.
I did not hate it, but again, it was one episode, so
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I thought it was somewhat more compelling than Ahsoka, which I
Yeah.
thought was dull, to be
Yeah.
honest.
That's like some of the worst Star Wars. I think that might be the worst Star Wars thing I've seen at like
Well, it's because
in
Dave Filoni's terrible. And
Yes.
so everyone can throw tomatoes at me because they love him, but really can't stand that guy. So I think he's terrible.
You
But
see,
it's been a
Steve?
long time since I've been on with you guys.
It,
This has
it
been a
has,
while.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's like old times here. Although
It
I have to
is.
look at your ugly faces when it was before it was
I
on.
know.
Yeah, I actually discovered like while editing, it would film just me. So there's this whole like bit of me editing where it'd just be like this really bad angle from underneath, and I'd just be sitting there, and it's, so
Nice.
there is video footage somewhere. But yeah, so we're waiting on Gus to have our good time conversation about how great the hobby is and how wonderful it is and how it doesn't suck. Um, now, Ron, you had an interesting point about why it doesn't suck now. Do you remember what that was?
Where did I express this viewpoint?
I might have been on our post. Do you know where I'm going with this, Steve?
Uh, Not right away, no. So
Well,
it's a
I think
comment that Ron made?
I think basically your point was it has sucked since at least 2004. I think that was I think that was what.
I do remember that, yeah.
Yeah, so
Oh,
I don't
yeah,
know if you'd
maybe.
want to follow up on that basic idea.
I guess it depends on like what vector you're judging the suckitude, like is it like participation? Is it like values or general interest, excitement in the movies? I don't remember making the comment that it sucked since 2004, but right now it kind of seems like we're in a down period in terms of excitement, not just in collecting, but in, Star Wars in general. Kind of feels a little bit after like Revenge of the Sith came and went, there was kind of a down period where it seemed like there was not as many people coming in, some people leaving, and values stagnated, which tends to upset people, and
Yeah.
kind of feels similar to that. People are older now though, so there's that new wrinkle. But yeah.
Okay, so I guess I was trying to let him just go, Steve, but I guess he doesn't. You can turn off your camera if you want to just go, Ron. That's okay
I
too.
mean, I can still go. I mean, I just does it. I mean, I don't know. I think things, like I said, have stagnated somewhat. I think, social media has changed sort of the way we all interact with collecting. I don't know if it's positive or negative. I mean, obviously there's probably some positives and some negatives, but kind of seems like there's less in-depth involvement with collecting and information, which is always what the archive was kind of been about. And I think most of us were involved in the news group, and internet forum era of Star Wars collecting, which was really more about like engaging with text, like where you had to read and kind of learn things. And now social media is much more geared towards photos. And so there's a lot of people just posting photos and you don't see nearly as much conversation, which kind of leads to a different vibe in terms of how people are interfacing with collecting. So
But it doesn't suck because it's the 30th anniversary. Not only is it the
yes.
30th anniversary of the Star Wars Collectors Archive, it's the 10-year anniversary of us celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Star Wars Collectors Archive, which feels to me like maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Do you guys feel that too?
Yeah, it's a little, it feels closer than it is.
10th anniversary, you mean?
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
wild. So
Yeah, it feels like 2 weeks ago. I remember we were talking about it when we were driving to, was it North Carolina, Sky? Was that
I think so.
that we went
Yeah.
to?
And we were all excited, but I'm getting ahead of ourselves, Steve. So as usual, Steve has done most of the pre-production, and then I don't edit anymore, so I don't do a lot of the post-productions. I don't do anything anymore, Steve. So you should just be doing the whole thing. But
I don't know
we're
about
welcoming
that.
Gus. How you doing, Gus? Uh-oh. Do we have like a CNN feed here?
Hear me? Okay.
There you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Gus.
A little
Oh,
quiet.
you're working or
Yeah, it's a little quiet.
okay, let me
Um,
see. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, I think it's better.
That sounded a little bit better.
I've had sometimes problems with Zoom. Hold on. Let me
Yeah, I did a podcast with like a real deal, like he does like the drive time radio in Toronto. And he had me like talk on the mic for like 5 minutes, making sure that it sounded right. I was like, yeah, I should always do that. I've done entire interviews with people where you can't hear them. I'm too afraid to tell them.
how's this? If I just talk like this, is that okay or is it too faint? Is it
I think it's still a little faint, but
Okay. That's weird. Okay. Let me check. Let me see what I can do here.
It's video, so we could have Ron sort of do interpretive dance of everything you say if he can
Okay,
hear
okay,
you.
let's do that.
I'm sure that'll draw in the viewers. Interpretive dance.
All right, let me see if there's a setting here to do.
Wait, oh no,
Whoa.
it's just me. Wait, I don't want that. Okay, this is why we probably should edit. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. All right, I'm gonna share. Okay, share. Okay, I'm just gonna do that normal style. There we go. And then share like that. Okay, there we go.
That's looking better.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes,
Volume?
I think that's better.
I turned the
Look.
volume, I mean, I turned it up, supposedly, so.
Okay, or we can just ask you to yell. So Steve, what are we doing here? Tell us about this wonderful the first slide that we're going to have here. What is this image?
Well, okay, so we thought a while back we'd get a few of us together to kind of say that things aren't terrible right now. And one of the things that isn't terrible is that the archive has survived 30 years. So we had a friend of the show, Bill Cable. He did this great new logo for the archive's 30th anniversary. And then, yeah, we have Ron and Gus here. Basically, I thought to just kind of give a little oral history of the early years of the archive and how you both got involved in it. And then, there's a couple things that are, I guess, more personal to Sky and I too that we can go through as we go through. But that's the gist of it. Yeah, celebrating 30 years.
So maybe a fun question to keep in mind, and if you have an answer, jump in with it. But what is the thing about collecting now that is better than it was in 1994? Like what is the thing comparatively that is the best about collecting now versus then?
I think there's a lot of things that are better. I mean, I think that it's a bigger community. I think that creates a lot of opportunities. I mean, I think it lets you find more obscure things. It lets you network with just a vast worldwide community. I think it lets you get into it. Loving a lot of niche things in collecting. The bigger the niche communities are, the better it is for learning and finding out stuff. I think that's better. So some of that's better. I think that there are definitely some pluses. I would say on the balance, probably negatives of social media, but I think there are a lot of pluses of social media and collecting.
Yeah.
So those are some of the positives. I think many things are better. I think there are a lot more events where we get together, at a big scale than there were in the early mid 90s. So I'd say top of my head, those are the things.
Okay, good. We'll give Ron some more time because I'm sure he wants to come up with the perfect answer.
Yeah.
I don't think I have a perfect one, but just to expand on what Gus said, and this kind of is an extension of what I think what Gus started with the archive 30 years ago, is that making connections with collectors around the globe is instantaneous in a lot of cases. It's not hard to find things in other countries. Well, it couldn't be hard, but it's way easier than it was in like 1995, right? Where even when the internet was going, then it was very difficult to make contacts in a lot of countries with different people, and you were doing it over email, and sometimes even then still in letters and shipping actual physical notes through the mail. Whereas now I'm not saying everybody's on social media, but you have access to a ton of people, and like Gus said, to find obscure things, it's generally way quicker than it was years ago. And really, I see like the Star Wars Collectors Archive as being kind of the first step on that road to where we are today, where it's like everybody's way more connected, and that's a positive thing ultimately.
Yeah, and I think too, like it's interesting because I often will go back to the old price guides, the pre-internet price guides, and the IG-88 is the most valuable Star Wars collectible of all time, and it reminds me. So I just settled my dad's estate, because he was a pretty good art collector, and he had what was claimed to be like one of the biggest crystal balls in the world, and it was on this little stand, and no one ever cared about the stand. And I had this whole idea that like I was going to get this ball and it was going to be worth all this money. And I had the whole thing appraised, and the guy just looked at the ball and just put it aside and then stared at the stand because the stand was actually interesting. I was like, this isn't the biggest crystal ball in the world. He's like, yeah, no, back in the 70s and 80s, everyone got all excited about crystal, but it's actually not that hard to find big pieces of crystal. Like but oh my God, my retirement, my 12-inch IG88 retirement. But yeah, it is nice having sort of a real idea of how to get stuff and how rare it is. Yeah, this is an awesome image though that Bill made. I haven't had a chance to look at it this carefully. But really brave with the color choices, and he's never listened to an episode of the show, Steve. So we can say bad things about it, but I think it looks great.
Yeah, multi-time guest and big contributor of art, but yeah, refuses to listen. So
Yeah.
it's all good, you know.
Yeah, he did a nice job. It's like we had some ideas and whatever, and then he just kind of had. I've worked with Bill a number of times on different graphics, and he usually always has his own very specific idea, and it ends up being better than your idea in the end. So yeah, it looks really cool. I mean, it's
I
surprisingly.
like it. It's a really cool concept.
Never time listener, long time contributor. Yeah. All right, and then now, so to describe to people who don't watch this, Steve put together a slide that has an image from what I believe is Golden Eye, the video game for N64, and then on the right is not the original is that the original landing page of
It's one of the early ones. I
One
don't
of
think
the-
it's the
yeah.
original, but
It's got to be. I wasn't there for the first few, like until 97-ish. So it's got to be 3 or so years after, or 4, because John Wooten's on there too.
yeah, so it's like I'm guessing like 97, 98, something like that. Maybe.
Oh.
Okay, so the original landing page we don't have, Steve. You couldn't find it, Mr. Archivist?
Well, the Internet Archive doesn't have everything, unfortunately. Yeah,
might
it has
be-
some earlier ones. There, one of the graphics later in the slides, I think, has a representation of kind of what it looked like. This, I just happened to grab from Dave Quinn's great post that he just put out there.
On the
But
20th anniversary, we did a compendium of like earlier landing pages. It
Yeah.
might be in an old blog post. Like I
Yeah.
don't know, if it's not that far back, but
So we all missed a chance to make a Jedi librarian from episode 2 joke. So
yeah,
I'm mainly disappointed in you, Gus, because I think you're the only other person who's watched episode 2 as much as I have. But yeah, and it does not
Yeah,
exist or whatever.
No one else is
says.
gonna get the joke, you know?
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, so that's pretty fun. So why, Steve, is there a golden eye?
So I thought it'd be kind of fun to ask you, Sky, like earliest memories of coming to the archive. And for me, I just put this in here because it happened to be, I'm pretty sure it was the second time I ever encountered the word archive, and the first was the GoldenEye game at the
Oh.
archives level. And so this is probably roughly around the same time. But yeah, it's just, for me, it's one of those things where that word has just happened to define the rest of my life pretty much. Like if my life was a word cloud, it would be archive, because that's what I do for my job. But it's just funny to me that like those two things are timed pretty similarly, and I happen to find this image of it. But that's just my personal connection. But what about you? What do you remember about first, like coming
So,
upon the archive?
I mean, so the early days for me were like 2003, 4, 5, around there. And that was just like most of the time. I don't know how I found Rebel Scum. And then I spent a ton of time on Cloud City, just looking at stuff that I wanted to buy, and then and then going on Brian's Toys, and then having everything always be sold out on Brian's Toys. And then I would like somehow stumbled onto the archive, and then I would just spend, like many people do, just hours upon hours upon hours. And then that was that weird thing where, I didn't know that Gus and Ron were just Gus and Ron. At that point, they were like these figures of myth. And, that's why I was so nervous to meet them the first time at Celebration 3. So yeah, like I remember meeting Ron the first time a lot more than I remember going to the archive for the first time, because he was
it's
wearing
gonna be the
a,
story where I like bullied you or something. And
no, well, no. I mean, you totally ignored me because you were walking with Ed. But no, there was earlier in the day, and you were wearing your My Bloody Valentine t-shirt, and I was like, that's exactly how I thought I would meet Ron. So yeah.
my ignoring you is how you thought I would meet you.
No, you were nice to me the first time when we
okay.
met at the convention on the floor, and then later on in the lobby when I was hoping to get invited to one of the cool parties, you and Ed just walked by. You didn't.
There
like,
are no cool parties.
I know.
Really.
I
Except for
learned
the
that.
archive party, which is all Steve, and
Yeah.
There were no cool parties till you guys started.
pretty much, like ironically.
Yeah, well, they will be restarted again. We just have to stop moving and having babies. So I can hold up my end, Steve. I don't know about you.
That's a lot of work, man.
Yeah.
You know,
So, yeah.
Am I supposed to answer when I first remember the site?
So you
you
weren't there at the
growing.
very beginning, Ron?
I wasn't, no. I mean, it was
You were there very early.
94. It
Yeah.
was, I was on Usenet, so that was the pre-Rebel Scum. It was like, text-based internet discussion forums. I think it was I think it was before the collecting split, so it was probably Rec Arts, SF, Star Wars,
Yeah.
and it's probably Gus. And I may have sort of known Gus at the time. Like we may have traded, or I might have bought something from you.
Yeah, I'm trying to place the timing. I mean, a lot of us networked first on the Usenet groups. There was a Star Wars group on Usenet. It wasn't even a collecting group, and one of
Right.
our first things was to create a Star Wars collecting Usenet group, which was surprisingly controversial. But
Yeah.
I wrote the draft, and I had input from several people. I know Chris participated in writing the draft, and we had participants, and they had this formal, incredibly bureaucratic protocol, but we had a vote on it. And surprisingly, there are people actually vote against this kind of thing. But anyway, we had a vote on this and we got it passed, and we created a collecting news group. And that's when a lot of our networking really took off. But prior to that, we just networked in the general Star Wars group. And then a few years later, we then splintered it to a vintage group separate from and that was also of course, controversial.
Yeah. Hugely
I don't know
controversial.
why, but anyway, because people are like, you can't call it vintage. How dare you call it vintage? No one's ever going to call it vintage. And of course, vintage is now what everybody calls it. But at the time, I remember it being really controversial, like calling it vintage. But yeah, the Usenet groups were where people hung out, and that's where we got to, a lot of us met, and we sold and talked about topics and got to know each other. And that's sort of before the archive. That's where I got contacts of people and reached out to people about, like, hey, I want to put this website together. Would love to get information and images from people, and let's put them all in one place. And that's where really first days of networking.
So then
Right.
what was it called? So the term vintage for Star Wars toys came up on the Usenet by all y'all's just talking?
Yeah, I think informally some of us had thrown the term around, but
Right.
I think the first time we actually had to formalize it was when we had to create a news group, and we
Wow.
called it, like, I think it was like rec. I'm gonna get it wrong, but like rec.ars.sci-fi.starwars.collecting.vintage, and we called it vintage, and I think that was the first time it was actually formally called vintage.
Wow. Okay.
Even
Well,
though
I mean,
informally, I think people had used vintage before.
Probably, yeah.
did you know that, Steve?
I mean, broadly, yes. And it's funny that you brought up Usenet. Somewhere in here, I included, and this is something Ron had shared back for the 20th anniversary. There it is. Yeah, it's Gus's original
Yeah, that's what I was going to
announcement.
mention.
Yeah.
I think
So,
I saw that, and at the time, I probably sort of knew Gus, but wasn't really friends with him. And I saw that, and I probably mentioned this maybe at Celebration when we did the panel on this. But I mean, I remember not knowing. I mean, at the time, it sounds funny now, but that whole URL, that was just, I didn't even know what that was. Like, I couldn't figure
So-
out how to access the internet. To me was text based, and the whole thing of trying to load that didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what to do with that. It wasn't
That information.
clickable, and I didn't know what to do with the URL. And then someone else explained to me that I had to have a browser, and I had no idea. And my
Yeah.
computer, whatever browser there was, my computer wouldn't run it, and I just couldn't figure out how to do it for like a year.
So I'm going to read this for those who can't
yes.
see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And then,
So-
by the way, in '94, like, just websites, like, I think Mosaic was the only thing, like, it was, people didn't even know about people were just learning about websites. It was pretty new.
Yeah, I've been writing my little summary for the blog that we're gonna do. Me, Steve, and I are gonna do a compendium of people have sent us some stuff. But I kind of did some research, and according to Wikipedia, there was like 2,800 websites in mid 2000 and mid 1994.
Wow.
So 2,800, just
Yeah.
it's like nothing.
Yeah.
today.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this is what it says. I've put together a www site with a bunch of images and files relating to Star Wars collectibles. The URL for the archive is www, and then it's the Washington University address,
Computer Science
University of
Department.
Washington.
Yeah.
Feel free to submit any articles, lists, and especially images for this archive. There's already quite a few, and I'm about to add a lot more images in the very near future. Gus, August 18th, 1994. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's really funny, Ron, because I mean, I remember I talk about it. I used to, they would give you the free AOL discs, and back then
Yeah.
AOL had a button that said internet and it didn't do anything. You just pressed on the button and it was like a picture of the
Yeah.
world or whatever. And you were like, wow, this is going to be so cool someday. I'm just going to go back and learn how to do finishing moves in Mortal Kombat in the chat rooms, which is what I did instead of Star
The
Wars.
internet to me was all, like I said, text-based. It was bulletin boards and discussion groups. So the whole thing of like, I did not know what the World Wide Web was at that time and didn't even have I didn't even understand what would happen. Like I couldn't even get it that it would like load up pages with, designs and images and stuff. So it wasn't until maybe a year later that I finally looked at the site,
And the
Yeah.
cool
This
thing,
predates
the cool thing about
Amazon,
this,
but this
but this
predates
email,
Amazon by
though-
like a year and Google by a few years, just to give an idea of
Yeah.
context. And another funny thing, I think Sky, you'll appreciate this being in academics. So this was hosted off the computer science department at UW, where I was a grad student at the time. And UW, is a pretty hot shot. University of Washington is a hot shot computer science department. A lot of great research, and very well known. And I was monitoring the traffic on their website, and they have a lot of research published, and and the archive traffic was just dominating all of their, like it was something like 99% of the traffic on the University of Washington Computer
Wow.
Science Department. I was like embarrassed because it was just so much of their web traffic was this, but it also gave me a kind of an interesting perspective on, as a grad student, because in academics you have this you're sort of fed this the importance of research and all this, and you realize the popularity of this esoteric topic of Star Wars collecting in comparison to research, and it was it really gave a very fresh perspective on what I was doing in grad school. Anyway, it was kind of fun.
That was another point I was making in the thing I was writing earlier today, is that on the early internet it seemed like Star Wars was like 2/3 of the sites. It's like it really was like a great demonstration of the stealth popularity, because at the time Star Wars was not really in the public consciousness that much, but it was like you realized when you saw the early internet content that, man, there's just a huge population of people out there who still really Star Wars really meant something to them, so much so that they were making websites and early internet forums and stuff based on it.
Yeah, it makes sense generationally, that's what it is. And yeah. And also, Steve, I mean, you told me before that Gus is selling this as an NFT, this first email. So you can buy an actual representation of this email.
Yeah. I was gonna say, we need to, I know a lot of people talk about how the site was once Toys R Us, but really what we need on t-shirts is just this long,
Yes.
long URL.
But you can only buy it using Jorgula coin. So
Right,
that's the okay. So going back to actually, it's fascinating, the idea of the split, because when Steve and I got going on the collectors club, the vintage collectors club of California, I was intentionally reacting to the fact that the Pennsylvania club was just too much Star Wars and too much collectors of all stuff. And so that's why the California club was vintage only. And eventually, that split seems like that's a natural thing that happens, where you start off all Star Wars, then all collectibles, and then vintage. That it's just sort of anyways, it's neat to see how the community breaks up that way. Ron is frozen in kind of a cool pose.
Yeah, I don't know what. Hold on, let me see if I can.
I was like, man, whatever's over there is really funny.
You can keep going,
We
but
can
I'll
all do
see
it.
if I can start it and restart it or something.
There you are.
I don't know why that happened.
Okay, so then Ron wasn't even on there because he couldn't figure out what a URL was. So then who are so it was just you and Wooten, or just you, Gus, in the beginning?
Chris was definitely there at the start. And then Wooten was there pretty early. And there were other people contributing that weren't necessarily full time, like Martin Thurn, contributed some stuff very early. I'm trying to remember early on, but Wooten was there very early as well. So I don't remember the exact sequence, but it was, we weren't it was more like, it was very informal. It was like, because originally it was just like, friends getting together to share information. We weren't really strict about, it was just whoever wanted to contribute said, yeah, you're welcome, be an editor and just add information to it. Here, give you access, and we'll start to add entries, and whoever wanted to run with it. So we never expected it to really go anywhere. It was mostly for ourselves, actually, just to share information among ourselves, because we were so curious and learning about so much obscure stuff that we just wanted a place to just hang all this information we were finding.
Yeah, that's my memory. Is like I got involved because probably I was talking to Gus and Chris about prototypes pretty regularly, and that was kind of one of the big focuses of the site. Like I remember Gus and Chris went to Cincinnati in like, was it 95-ish or something?
Yeah,
And you guys
90,
met
95,
Tom
yeah.
Neuheisel and Steve Denny and came back with all these photos, and that was the way people didn't have a way to share photos at the time, remember, like other than mailing actual photos to each other, which is what happened a lot of times. So I mean, remember those guys posting photos they took. You can still find them on there. They're really small now, but back then it was like to see a photo of Tom Neuheisel's collection or Steve Denny's from someone who'd actually been there was like, there was no other way to do that. So that was really one of the things that was really worth treasuring about the site at the time. And people were really over the moon about it. Like I remember even around the time I first became involved, it's like people were aware, people in the collecting community were aware of the site and were just kind of blown away by some of the pictures on there of stuff that they'd never heard of. And it was just, it seemed like it just was a huge success in the minds of people who are interested in vintage collecting, like the same kinds of people who maybe bought Tomart's Action Figure Digest, but I think we had, where Gus and Chris at the time had stuff that wasn't even in outlets like that. It was just the only way to see it was to go on the internet and look at the archive.
And Steve has provided us an image of the old comprehensive guide to U.S. figure card backs by Dan Florida and Ron Salvatore.
Yeah.
And why did you pick this image, Steve?
So there's a few things I put in here just that were, at least for me, kind of early mainstays that I just was constantly finding myself referring to. And the cardback guide was one. The prototype section, like you were talking about, Ron, just spending hours discovering things and just being blown away about what existed that you just had no idea about. Like the Gargan figure was the one that I remember being like, wait, what?
Tom Neuheisel had that. Well, that's a different picture, but the one Tom Neuheisel had is the one I remember seeing, which was like an incomplete hard copy that Gus and Chris had taken a photo of.
Yeah.
But the cardback thing, it's like Gus and I both, I remember talking in the late 90s about trying to do more comprehensive guides to things, and that led to this whole special features section where we did like charts and articles and stuff. And the cardback guide was one. Dan Flaherty had put together a whole, he had loose cardbacks, wasn't even carded figures, but he put together a whole system to kind of chart all the variations that he was aware of. And I'd never seen something like that. So I reached out to him and asked him to collaborate with me to put something like that together because I thought it was interesting. And that's really the first thing like that was out there. This predates the Kellerman guide and is different than John's. I think John's had, the harder you look at the cardbacks, the more variations you can find. So that depending on who's putting it together, it's going to be unique. But that was the first time something like that was out there.
And a lot of these things you have to draw a line. Like we also had like loose figure variations, and one of the things in the 90s when we were all getting into the variations with, like, I had loose figure set, but I liked the carded figures more. But we studied them and we're like, all right, there's a slippery slope here. You got to cut off variations at some point. But now loose figure collectors take it to an extreme that we were aware of in the 90s, but we were like, yeah, we draw the line here, and then it gets into crazy land. But to Ron's point, like, everybody who does it, people take it to a new place, and that's cool. Like I did a guide on Power of the Force coins. Nobody had ever categorized Power of the Force coins at all. And I first published it in Martin Thurns' fanzine, Star Wars Collector, and then I put it on the archive. But I had collected the Power of the Force coins, and I noticed patterns of scarcity, and some of them followed very solid buckets of of scarcity, and some were of softer buckets, but it's mostly held up over the
Yeah.
years. And now people have mostly adopted it, but it was like the archive was the first place we really had it. It became sort of the standard and part of the first coin collecting, but nobody really understood which coins were rare, which were common, and how so, anyway, there were things like that in the archive that we just did it for ourselves, but it just turned out to kind of like, I don't know, gain traction, I guess, among
Yeah.
collectors.
Similar to that, I think it was after the card back thing. It was definitely after the coin thing, but I put together a thing on catalog mailer packs because I
Mhm.
realized, similar to Gus with the coins, I'd realized I was collecting all of the catalogs from Sears and JCPenney. I'd realized that you could extrapolate from the content of the catalogs and the numbers given to the packs what had been released. Because at that time, really, I'm not even exaggerating, people didn't really know what those boxed packs were. They would refer to them all as like Sears, or it's like Sears overstock. Sometimes you'd hear, but it's like, no, those things all tie into what was offered in those Christmas catalogs. So it was a lot of effort because I had to buy all those catalogs, but I eventually put together that chart, and that also predated the Kellerman book by a few years. And yeah, I just stuff like that was like really that, and the coin thing and the cardback thing was like the first time anyone had really broached those subjects in a really in-depth way. And really, when you do that, I think you sort of change the way people perceive what they're collecting, and also the way
Yeah.
they interface with the items, because it's suddenly that, oh, that's what these are. And it's not just a random surprise thing, but I can actually, here's one that I know was released, and I'm going to start looking for it now, right? Even if they don't have a photo of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that,
yeah,
that-
that really changed things.
Your Kenner store display guy, like I use that.
Yeah, that one too. Yeah, which I've been wanting to do a big update for that for like.
Yeah, there's obviously
years.
a couple new ones you found, but it's still, I mean, it
Yeah.
still stands the test of time, which is actually kind of like one of the on that point, the test of time thing. It's kind of interesting because one of the criticisms we often get in the archive, a valid criticism, is, wow, your designs are like way outdated. It's like this little 90s site and stuff. And like one of the things that I think was sort of the vision of the archive originally was like, I never wanted it to be something that we had to like work on every day for the rest of our lives. Like we wanted to be able to just be lazy and just let it go. Like just, not do anything on it for 2.5 years and not worry about it. And it's because like how many other sites get that much attention and we can just coast, for a while and then go very busy on it for a while. And so some of the designs are outdated, some of the articles, some of the things could be updated, but who cares? Like we're not, I don't know. It's funny because I get approached by people like, man, you guys have lost your edge and you're not like, you could
that,
be,
that is
the
your
new-
edge.
The new people or I'm like, we're not doing this to be famous or anything.
Yeah.
Like we're doing it because we like
Yeah.
it,
That's true. And the thing is, people have been saying stuff like that literally since like the late 90s.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, you didn't do this enough, or why don't you guys? So it's like, all right, well, yeah, it's never been perfect. It's never a professional thing. And I kind of like the fact that it's like what's the word?
Janky.
It's like it's janky
Yeah.
and multi point of view. It doesn't have like a monolithic design or even a monolithic personality. There's like weird little corners to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like
Things
poster
that you
collecting,
find-
but before the 90s, right? Like every poster was different. What is it going to look like? It's not the
Yeah.
same stupid triangle head image everywhere.
And it really reflects kind of like a lot of like idiosyncrasy in the hobby and different points of view and different ambitions. But it was never, to Gus's point, it was never, I don't think anyone was doing it to get famous or anything. It really was, I hate to pat ourselves on the back, but it really was sort of a labor of love and just an interest in information and trying to get stuff that you had discovered as a collector and share it with people, because that was really what we were all about. Like even the early prototype stuff was just the excitement of like first showing like a thing that no one had ever known was prototyped. It was like, and people would accuse it of being fake. They'd be like, oh, that stuff's all fake, those guys, I've never heard of that. It's like, no, it's real. There really was a Gargan, or there really was this. And some people didn't want to believe it unless it was in like a magazine. And it's like, no. But after a while, I feel like we became more authoritative than even the magazine people, where it's like there was like a lot of clout in especially the prototype realm.
Yeah, and I think like, so like if you think about like archaeology, you know, like if you go to a dig site or whatever, you can see different layers and like this was from this era and this is from that era. You can see that on every stage of the archive. Even
Yeah.
like when Steve and I come in, even the stuff that we did that was trying to make it look new is already dated. And like we really need to never make things like on the bottom of this image, it says site best viewed in 800 by 600. Allow 10 to 25 seconds for large images to load. I'm thinking of Homer looking at New Janeway, you know, I mean, a comic book guy, you know, it's like 10 to 25 seconds.
Yes.
And it's totally, it's funny because like both of you have made reference to things being before Kellerman. And I think that speaks to this sort of like medium bias that we have towards print when in reality, what makes the archive so great is that it's the absolute best of the internet. And because you don't change it, because you don't make it look smooth or slick, like it is itself a vintage collectible while
Yeah,
talking about
yeah.
vintage collectibles. And
Mhm.
it's totally more important. What makes Kellerman so important is that you can't change it. And I think what makes the archive so important is that you could change it, but you haven't. You know, there's some kind of, it's like poetry, it rhymes.
It's definitely like substance over style. Like it is so indexed on substance, like
Mhm.
and really not trying to be fancy and slick on style, or you know, or try to be, you know, current. You know, but I like the quirkiness of it. I think
So out of
Yeah.
curiosity, then so the term 12 back that came from the Usenet. Do we know the first person to
Oh.
call them 12 backs?
12 back was used I mean, Usenet's been around since like at least the 70s, but maybe the 60s, but the 12 back was around, I think, since 80s probably. It was used in
Yeah.
collecting
That's an
Okay.
interesting question of who first used that. You'd have to go
Yeah.
back and look at old guides to see if they used the term 12 back. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty old. I think it's
Toy Shop was using it before. Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
Usenet, by the way, parenthetically, Usenet, there was actually a Usenet Star Wars group in the 80s that formed around the time of Return of the Jedi and then died off, and then was one that reformed in the early 90s. So it actually Usenet goes way back actually, but
Wow.
the 12 back, yeah, 12 back predates like the resurgence of Star Wars in the 90s.
Well, that's something for
think-
us to track down as archivists, Steve, right? Like who was the first
Yeah,
person?
the first reference. Yeah,
Does CJ still
would
have
be-
his site,
I think so.
12back.com?
Yeah.
What was that
Thank
like?
you.
Was there like competition there? Like, was that like, did he like want to be with the archive or like, because I remember seeing both of them and thinking, is this like a Coke and Pepsi thing? I mean, obviously the archive had a lot more in it, but like, or is it
That's
just
my
like you
memory.
were all doing your
I
own
never
things?
saw it as a competition. I mean, I mean, there were definitely, I think there were definitely sites that were competing with the archive. I never saw it as a competition with any site. Personally, I thought it was like, I don't know, rising tide lifts all boats. That's how I viewed it. I mean, and I will give really concrete examples of this. Like early days, for example, we were the first to publish, it's incredible to say this, but we were the first to publish Kenner's re-entry into action figures in 95, the images.
yeah.
We were the very first, you know, all the
Wow.
sites now that compete to show the latest release of the Hasbro
Yeah.
action figures. We
Yeah.
were actually the first to ever do that. Which is like so out of our wheelhouse now.
Yeah.
But,
That's
like,
my memory is that early on we were trying to update out news on like stuff like that, but there became to be so many Star Wars sites focused on Hasbro stuff that is just like, well, this is ridiculous. Like we're never
Yeah.
gonna compete.
we did
with this.
bootlegs, we did customized figures,
Yeah.
things like that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
people did it better than us, and we're like, let them go do it. I don't care. Like that, I'm good. I'm fine handing that off. If someone's gonna do it better, you know, I was actually relieved in some ways, like if others did it better. Because it was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
let us focus on our strengths, like prototypes, you know, like let us play to our strengths, or the coins, or store displays, or movie props, or things that we're very good at, you know.
But don't we still
Yeah.
send Yehuda to Toy Fair every year to make sure he comes back with the hottest photographs?
Yeah. Well, and part of it's like, yeah, like who's involved with the archive takes an interest in something and takes it in a new direction, right? Like, you know, so that's part of it. But yeah,
Yeah, no, definitely. Like I remember, like Gus said, we were doing bootlegs for a while. And I want to say that certainly the first site with bootlegs on it. Like I remember the Polish bootlegs, the loose ones, and people had never seen those before. But then John Alvarez came on board and did a lot of work for a while, and I think he he did a lot of, he and Joe Iglesias did a lot of features, at least a couple on various bootleg things, and made a lot of headway with that. But yeah, I think people on other sites and other forums kind of took that even further. So but
So
yeah, I mean, I don't think we were ever in competition with 12back.com. It was more, I think we helped promote it. You know, we kind of
Yeah.
like, it was a lot of cross
yeah,
promotion. I think CJ just liked to do his own thing, more or
yeah.
less.
Yeah, I remember in the early days thinking, like, kind of wondering that, because it was clear that you weren't competing with Force.net or rebelscum.com or whatever. But yeah. And then is the fake Pablo San Lucas article finally off, or are we gonna keep that on forever? Have we managed to take that down yet?
I don't think so. You
Okay,
mean
so it must still be there. Awesome. I think maybe we should just keep it there for just because it's been at least 10 years that we've been saying, like, oh man, we need to take that off the site because those are all
oh
fakes.
yeah, I don't, is there, I don't even, I'm not even super familiar with it. There's like an
The
article on there that's,
Yeah, there's like a comprehensive guide to the, was it Pedro San Lucas, Pablo San Lucas, the fake bootlegs with like the little plastic helmets on them
oh geez, I
that
don't,
were
I
made
guess
in the 90s, and they were, was it Argentinian, Steve? Where were they out of?
I think so. I'll have to double check. It's
Okay.
funny. So the slide you have up right now, I just put kind of a greatest hits of at least things that I always remembered about the archive from the early time I was on there. But I saw that, and when I was browsing, I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah, we
But
gotta take that off.
yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, so Steve has a whole bunch of images here, and definitely the new acquisitions painting. That is like, I mean, that to me is like maybe that evokes more nostalgia in me than a Star Wars card back because I
there's a whole
just
yeah.
so
story about that, right, Gus? I mean,
Yeah.
about how that got done.
Yeah, it was like Steve Denny just basically commissioned a contest of like, right? It was like, I'm sure I'll probably get some of the details wrong, but he did a contest of like a painting contest, and I guess it was the prize was like, was it a proof card that he
There's proof
gave?
cards, yeah.
Proof cards to the winner. Um, and so and there were and so people just competed and did, you know, whoever could come up with, and I forgot what the theme was. I know he had like, I know he had constrained it somehow. I just don't remember exactly. Because I don't think it was like new acquisitions was the theme or anything. I think that but Richard Cox did this painting, and that he had put on new acquisitions based on EV99 and 88, or EV99 saying this in Return of the Jedi. So we got his permission to use it for the new acquisitions page on the archive, but it was the winning painting in the contest that Steve Denny did. And it was actually a very clever idea by Steve Denny. Steve Denny is a very clever, one of the people I look to is just one of the gods of collecting, and just very innovative, and came up with this idea, and he got the original art out of this, doing this contest. And,
Steve really likes painting, and he figured that's a great way to get a bunch of original paintings. And
Yeah,
tell him, like,
right.
you send me your original painting, I keep them all, and I
Yeah.
choose one as a winner, and you get a proof card or whatever it was. And
Yeah.
so he got a bunch of original paintings, including that one. But I don't. Did you look at it, Gus, and say, hey, can we use that for the new acquisition, the new?
Yeah, if I
Issues?
recall, what happened was like I just loved that one, and it was the winning one. And then I asked Richard, like, can we use it for the page? I recall asking him, can we just use that image for the page, because it was just perfect for the new acquisitions of
Yeah, and Steve probably still has the original. I mean, that would be a cool thing to have. Is the
Yeah.
original.
Yeah, actually, that'd be cool to ask Steve about.
He must have it. But also, I remember Gus and Chris, somewhere on the archive, it's still accessible. You have to have the right URL, but there was Steve's first internet-based sale of proof cards was hosted on the
Oh, yeah.
archive.
Mm.
And that was how I first bought mine. He had Jedi and Empire for sale, and I remember I bought like 2 Empire and 1 Jedi. And I just
Yeah,
remember interest was not huge. I mean, the prices were expensive at the time, but yeah.
No, it's funny about proof cards, because like there was a time when Steve had like basically a full set of the Power of the Force ones, and it was like something like 50 of them for like, he wanted to sell them for, I want to say it was like 1,000 a card or something. and I don't think it ever sold as a set, which like now in today's prices would be a
I'm
steal
sure.
for that amount. But we advertised on the archive for him. I was like, hey, yeah, you want to sell it? I'll promote it on the archive for you. But proof cards back in the day were, Steve had a lot of them, and but they were around so much that I know for people like Ron and me, it's like we were around them so much. Like I have some couple proof cards, but I just can't get into them because I saw thousands of them over the years. They don't do much for me unless they're like interesting proof card. But like there was a time where they became so accessible to people that it became trendy to collect. And I have found this in collecting. Oftentimes it's not that something becoming accessible plays a big part in how people get into something. So first shots is similar. So anyway, yeah, but Steve had so many proof cards, and we did help promote like the ones he had for sale on the archive.
Okay, so
Yeah,
so so
that's a real
Steve,
memory of mine.
for part 2 of the archives awesome celebration year, we need to find the proof guard
I'm
pages.
actually, yeah, I'm creating a scratch list that I need to track down. That
Good.
is the proof
And
card
then-
sale, and then the
we-
1995 announcement of the Kenner figures. Like, I would love to
Yep.
see that.
Oh yeah, we
That's-
can find that.
That's
I can
another
help
one.
too.
Also, we need to
help with your
contact
file.
Steve, other Steve,
Yeah.
about one of the other Steves, one of the 8 other Steves, to see if he has the original painting, if he
I can
has
ask him,
pictures
yeah.
of the old paintings, and then is Richard Cox still around? Can we figure out the proof card that he got? How much did he end up getting paid in 2024 money?
I haven't heard from him in a long time.
Yeah.
Ooh,
I might have his email address. It might be old.
But that'd be fun, right? Because if it
Okay.
was like a 12 back Luke proof, then that's a good $10,000 payment.
My vague memory is that it was more than one proof, but my guess is probably not Star Wars, but I really can't remember. But
Okay, well I think we have a lot more fun stuff to do, Steve. I'm really
Yeah.
excited about those episodes.
Yeah.
All right, Steve, tell me where else to go. Oh yeah, let's get to these famous pictures. Okay, so
I threw these in here just as in case we had already talked about some things, and this is when they jumped on. But I figured I had to
Spider-Man
get them in there.
so one is Gus Lopez was in Toy Fair magazine, which is pretty cool because I read a lot of Toy Fair magazine. And you are called Star Wars #1 fan. How do you feel about that, Gus?
It's funny, like you see that these articles where like everybody gets called like #1 fan whenever they do these articles. I always just cringe, or you get called super collector or something like that. It's
Yeah.
cringy, but yeah.
That's why
I
I
remember
always
visiting Gus and Pam. It says 20 years, so it was probably in that year. And I remember seeing that room with all the. Didn't you have fish tanks as displays?
Yeah. Yeah, you can see
wow.
them in there,
Oh,
right? Like
yeah.
the 12-inch action figures are in a fish tank.
Wow.
And that's what I use for display cases. And you see like there's cinder blocks holding up wooden shelves. Like that's what
Yeah.
I was a student at this time, right? So I like this is like total shoestring, but
Pre
like my
IKEA
so this
times.
is,
Yeah.
I mean, I am living on a shoestring budget at this point, right? But yet you'll see like there's a Droids 330 case there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, right? It's like, but you can see like, like, yeah, I have like, I have thing and there's like a Power of the Force proof sheet back there, so there's some good stuff there, but it's like, yeah, there's like slabs of wood with like, cinder blocks and fish tanks. That's how, and we're in like a crowded, like really tiny 2-bedroom apartment. So,
Yeah, I think that style could come back. I like the cinder blocks and fish tanks.
and then on the right we have the famous Spider-Ron photo. Which
yeah.
is Ron, what is the story behind this photo? This is like the way I always picture you because this was how
I don't know. My
this is your
sister
picture.
took it.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think we were going back to college or something. But for some reason, someone asked for a photo for some application related to the archive, and that's pre-digital camera, really. So it's like that's the one I had at hand. Scanned it.
Yeah, I was either going to use this or the picture of your little collection on top of the fridge with the Watto and the.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that was actually. I don't think I made that black and white in image. I think that was actual. We had bought black and white film for whatever reason, and we took photos. I think that was why it's in black and white.
Wow. Okay, Steve. So where are we going now? Oh, you want to talk about this
Oh.
CNN thing you found?
I mean, I just thought I sent that to you guys. I thought it was kind of funny, but yeah. So I think that graphic on the left is was one of the original collages on the site. It's funny if you go to the Internet Archive, the earliest entry for the archive I think is like 97 or something like that, and it's that image, but super, super, super grainy, like just incredibly grainy
John
and
Wooten
small.
made that, and that was
Okay.
like splash page. That was when internet sites had a
Right, like a
splash page
landing
where it's like
page,
yeah,
yeah.
and you'd have to click it or wait for a couple seconds.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I want to say we got rid of that because whatever host Gus was using was like charging us based on the data, and now
Yeah.
we're getting extra data, so it's
Yeah.
like we got rid
Yeah,
of it.
it sucks up, it sucks up like bandwidth to, to have splash, but also like splash pages generally are bad form now, like in design pages.
Mhm.
But it was a beautiful graphic. Still love the design of it. I mean, it's got some really awesome stuff in there. If you look,
Yeah.
Death Star is in there too. That's got to be when the Death Star
Yeah.
had not been in your
Yeah.
possession for all that long.
Yeah, Luke's ceremonial jacket in there.
Yeah,
Is that a Lobot head at the bottom?
yeah, it is.
Yeah, it looks like yeah.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's-
John Wooten made that. I'm pretty
Yeah.
proud.
So did you tell him what to put, or he just
Grabbed images off the
Grab-
archive to
Mhm.
yeah to
because the
At
Imperial
time,
Dignitary
like John
coin.
and I were working a lot on the site, and it was like a lot of very late night. Man, it might have been like an early chat program like ICQ that we would just be going back and forth on,
Yeah.
and like at 2 a.m. And I just remember him working on that, and yeah, it was really cool for the time. I mean, it looks dated now, but it's still pretty cool.
Yeah. I love that you have the rocket fet warning on top. Caution,
Yeah.
do not launch projectile toward face. It's just
Yeah.
there.
So I mean, Steve, we should do something with this, right? For the archive party, like make
Yeah,
like
I
little
mean-
posters of this image or something.
It would be
I
cool
think
if
so.
somehow we could go back in time and get like a really high res.
Yeah. Could we resurrect John's like Photoshop file from the dead?
Yeah.
Like would it render?
Blast
No, I'm
from
all
it.
for that. I'd love that. For sure.
Because it really is like all of the charm. And it is like I've looked at it here now for a while. I'm like, wait, is that a little triangle from a Canadian GDE card? And then there's a Blix, and yeah, it's really awesome. It's sort of
Yeah.
like a thumbnail. I mean, that's what it reminds me of. Like when you're trying to
Yeah.
make a thumbnail, like make it visually interesting.
Got
Right.
And
that
then
early TIE fighter artwork from the 12 back, which did you later end up with that actual piece, Gus? Is that one that you got?
Sure,
Or
the
TIE
which piece?
fighter art from the 12
I
back?
did, yeah. That was from
Yeah.
the Nihazl sale.
Yeah. So that was before Gus even owned it. It's in there, but
Yeah, I ended up actually, I didn't end up, what happened is, I bought the lot, but then split it with Arnaud, so he took,
okay.
so he ended up with a TIE fighter, and actually
Okay,
I
so
got
you
the
didn't get
Landscaper
that
and the
one.
Luke Saber.
But yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of good stuff on there for sure. And that was a lot of that stuff that you see on that collage is stuff you couldn't see anywhere else. It wasn't in
Right.
or magazines for the most part.
yeah, so
Yeah.
as far as magazines go, there was Tomart's and Lee's at that point.
Yeah, those are the two big ones.
And
And
and were
Tomart's had
they
more prototypes generally because they were right there in Cincinnati and had like a connection with the Earth.
Mhm.
And
so
I
were
think
you sort of competing with them in a way, or like what was that like? Like
I think they may have thought that because before Gus came around and the archive came around, I think that was like the main conduit for no one would see stuff unless it was in Tomart, it seemed like. And then afterwards,
Yeah.
it seemed like we stole the thunder on a lot of it. And also we put out the word that a lot of those blue hard copies were fake, or all of them were pretty much made later. And that really kind of, I remember the Tom Tumbush being unhappy about that.
Yeah,
But we were right.
Tom
I mean,
Tumbush
they were, it wasn't, it was an innocent mistake, but they certainly, publicized that stuff and it ended up being not real. So I do remember the complaints about that, but we were correct. So
yeah, he had a lot of that stuff, and yeah, I know that was a controversial thing. But also, Action Figure News and Toy Review had some prototype things too.
yeah,
Um,
they did.
But yeah, they might have it got trendy. I mean, you saw it in Toy Shop magazine. You'd have dealers would have, and then I started to write some articles for Toy Shop also about prototype stuff. But but yeah, I mean, I think we got to the point where we were the ones really with the primary content about prototypes. Like we had so much more content than anybody on that
Yeah,
side.
I kind of felt like when Tomart did their anniversary guide, which was really cool. And they had like it was the hardcover version that had like a whole section with like unproduced stuff and prototype stuff. It kind of felt like that was partially a response to the popularity that we brought to that whole genre of stuff.
Yeah, and I helped them with that, by the way. I gave them a bunch of photos that they used, and
Right.
they did credit me for it, and I lent them a bunch of photos to help them with the updated guide with Steve Sansweet. That's what you're talking about, where they had the supplement with
Yep.
yeah.
All right, then what's the CNN, Steve? There's an image with CNN, and it says in the news now, metal detectors installed at the Empire State Building after fatal shooting.
Yeah.
I did my research. This was the 1997 Empire State Building shoot. Ali Hassan Abu Kamal, a 69-year-old Palestinian teacher, opened fire on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. And at the time, they said that he was mad because, like, they said it was terror, and then his wife's or daughter said, no, he was just broke and he was sad. And then 10 years later, they're like, yeah, it was terrorism. It was about Palestine and Israel. So anyways, one casualty. So that was terror. Steve, thanks for sharing that with us. But why is the archive on a thing about a very early terrorist attack, Steve?
I guess, yeah, this is like a sign that things don't change. But no, this was there was a segment on CNN Showbiz or something from it was in 1997, right around the time that the special editions were in theaters, and it was just a little quick segment on Star Wars's presence on the internet, and it was mainly talking about the official StarWars.com website, but there was a section where they just go through a handful of sites that flash up on the screen. And I was just doing
Steve,
research.
I have to interrupt you here.
Yeah.
Are you a psychopath? Like, how did you find this? Like, what kind of psychopathic internet behavior led you to find this random, less than 1 second bit on a video?
I know. I think it was just luck, pure luck. I was doing research.
I've never seen it before.
Like,
do you remember
I was looking.
Gus?
I don't remember it at all. No, I mean, there were times we did get blips on occasionally on like on news and stuff, but I don't remember this on CNN.
Yeah, it was just one of those random things. I was searching for like Star Wars early internet, and I just watched. I'm like, holy shit, there it is right there. But yeah,
it's funny. It's on the screen for like a
it's like just a split second. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah.
That's
okay.
really cool.
Yeah, that's very cool and interesting. Just that happens to be like we know the exact date.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned
February
earlier,
1997.
like I mentioned earlier, like Star Wars on the early internet was like a massive thing.
Right. Yeah.
It's just like one of the big things that was on the internet was Star Wars for whatever reason.
What was the other thing, Ron?
What's that?
What was the other thing, Ron?
I don't know. Star Wars is definitely the thing that I remember.
Yep, only thing we've ever used the internet for.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Aside from porn, Star Wars was the big thing on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But the first thing I did when getting on the internet was look for other than like bands I liked and stuff, like Star Wars was the first thing. And I was like, oh, there's tons of Star Wars stuff. So yeah, I'm not surprised they did a news report on it.
Yeah.
See, I was like ahead of the game because I looked up video game stuff instead. So I learned how to like do moves for Mortal Kombat and Killer Instinct.
Yeah.
And like that's now what all the internet is for. It's just for video games.
I was past that time.
Yeah, I found like an old guide that I printed out from a bulletin board for Killer Instinct, and I looked up the guy who wrote it, and he's now like a bigwig at Twitch. And so it's sort of like the way like if someone's like, hey, I wonder what Gus Lopez is up to. Oh, he's doing well for himself, you know, like it's funny to see like the early days. It seemed to really track really well.
I mean, this is funny. Like I remember getting AOL, you know, stupid AOL and getting on the internet and you had to make a username, and I figured like, oh, I'm gonna pick like Star Wars, like Yoda. I was like, oh, it's taken, and just like being like amazed that someone would have taken Yoda. You know, I'm like, idiot. Of course, someone had Yoda. Like,
all right, and then we are definitely sorely lacking in Julius content here. So you included the toy shop scrapbook.
Yeah, this is more of like maybe a teaser for another episode with Chris. But and I know we've mentioned the toy shop scrapbook a lot over the years, but I just figured as a like a crucial point on the archive, I had to throw it in there. But yeah, it's
This guy, Chris isn't here to defend himself, but for years I pushed him to. I was like, why don't you scan all those? We'll put them on the archive. And he never wanted to. And then all of a sudden, I don't remember what the backstory was, if it was because we didn't have the bandwidth or something, but for some reason it ended up on Chris Nichols made a special site for it. But
yeah, it's like got its own
It
it
URL.
probably
everything.
should be on
We
the
had
archive.
limited storage space for a while, and then
Maybe.
now it's not a big deal. But like, yeah, but it was one of those things. Like, I'm so glad he did scan it, because like for years, I think a lot of us saved all our. I had piles of old toy
Yeah.
shops, but I'm glad. But then all of us ended up throwing it away because it just took up so much space. But I'm glad that he scanned a lot of this stuff, because
And he's
so
got-
much of the history
yeah.
of the hobby is in
He's
this.
got most of the notable ads I remember. Although a weird one, Gus, this came up. I was talking to Chris a while back about when you guys first got in touch with High Catline, who was a
Oh, yeah.
former guy who sold some stuff. And it was through an ad in Toy Shop. And Chris, that was not one he saved. I was like, how did you miss the High Catline ad? He's
Yeah,
like, I couldn't find it on his scrapbook thing, but
So,
Yeah.
so here's another idea. What if, I mean, this involves getting Chris involved, so we'll have to figure out some way to make it profitable. But like, do do like what he did for Star Wars Kenner commercials, but like actually selling the scrapbook, right? Like, I mean, I would buy that, right? To have it up on there, just like all of the Star Wars pages actually printed out onto a book, right?
I don't know if he's thought of that. But yeah, I mean, he could. I mean, it's right now, it's free on the internet. So I don't know.
Yeah, but people would still buy it. I'd buy
Probably.
it. I mean, I know you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Steve, would you buy it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like having it in that tangible form. I mean, I haven't browsed it on the web version in a while, but I don't know, having that right in your hands would be kind of fun
It's
for sure.
it's a little clunky,
Yeah.
the version on the archive. You know, like
I actually do have a printed back in the day when one of Chris's first jobs, he took his scrapbook to work and stole time on the copier and made photocopies. I still have them all in a
See,
bunch.
you have it. You got the first proof.
Although I think my version is not like there's additional ones he got later that are on the web.
okay, so Steve, are you writing that down that we should harass Chris to do that? Oh my God, Steve, why did you put archive party stuff in here?
I mean, okay, so it's just fun, and I figured if we're celebrating things that are good and fun, the archive party stuff is up there. And it also, just like you said way back when, it's just hilarious to me that these are actually both from current eBay auctions. So
Oh, wow.
people are still listing this stuff all the time, and just the fact that these exist, just I don't know, makes
Yeah, and
me
it's a
happy.
credit. It's a credit to you guys, and certainly Gus and I had very little to do with it, and other people. It's just basically you and Sky and Steve for making the archive party such a success. Because I was like, oh, cool, a party, but then it became like the party, like a celebration. Like that was like the best party that I was aware of, and people fighting to get in and everything. So that was pretty interesting. Pretty interesting moment in the website's history.
And fighting with us, for that matter. But
it's really the best. I think the best social event at Celebration. I mean, I hear people talk about all the time, like it's the highlight for them as like all the, there's, obviously Celebration to people who haven't gone. It's like really the best part of Celebration. A lot of times it's really nothing to do with necessarily with the content of Celebration, even though that's excellent. It's the opportunities to network and talk to people and all that. And the archive party for many people is the highlight. But I remember one year at Celebration, for whatever reason, I had like 3 or 4 parties in one night, and I was party hopping, and the archive party was part of it that night. And it was so much better than all the other parties I went to. It was like, because a lot of the other parties, it's like, oh, they have a celebrity guest and they like name drop and all this stuff. And it's just like the archive party was the only like genuine people having fun talking. It was just so different than all the other parties. I was just, it was just, it was amazing. You could just tell it was like, people that really were into this, just getting together, having a great time.
I
Yeah,
think, Steve, we need to do a tier list of all the archive party card backs, because I mean, like that Manatee Man, that is going to be hard to beat. But what I think is fun is, we've talked about it before, but when the podcast, there's the a line that my wife always likes to quote, which is, what's the best time to plant a tree 20 years ago? What's the second best time to plant a tree today, right? So when I wanted to do a vintage Star Wars podcast, I was mad because I'd already been listening to podcasts for 5 years in 2010, but I was like, screw it, I'm just going to do it anyways. And so I went to theforce.net and I went to Rebel Scum and I begged Jimmy Mack and he seemed to be okay with it, but then they didn't seem to think it worked. And I was like, damn it, I'll never have a home. And then the way that we ended up being a part of the archive was
Yeah.
so archive perfect
It
because we're
was,
just
yeah.
like, we don't have to be good. We don't have to have good sound production. We don't have to have more than two
It
guests.
fits right in the mold of just a little bit janky, but a lot of love.
And,
I'm
and
sure
And
you
every
asked
once,
us.
every week. You don't have to, there's no.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah. The
I'm
cadence
sure
is
you asked
a
Gus, and he was like, "Yeah, go for it, sure."
yeah, that was
Like,
exactly what it was like. It was like, yeah, okay. I was like, well, we can call ourselves part of the archive. I mean, that's why it was called the Kivecast instead of the
Yeah.
Vintage Pod, because it
Yeah.
like to us, it was a bigger deal being associated with the archive than it was being, the first vintage only podcast or whatever.
I
Yeah.
really think that added something to the site, and it's certainly, I mean, in my opinion, how long's the Kivecast been around now? It's like it's
February
Well,
2010.
Yeah, I
right?
mean,
So
if you
almost
consider us
15
to
years.
still be around, which is debatable
Yeah.
from month to month, but if we are still around, which I think we are,
And there was
then
a
yeah.
while there where it seemed like the podcast certainly had more traction than the website, because,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
I,
well-
I think
I got more mentions. People would mention it more to me than they would. So I think that was a really valuable contribution.
I think the podcast brings a lot to the website and vice versa. I mean, I think the podcast brings attention to it's fresh. You talk about topics, you drive awareness and bring the community together and so on. And then I think it's the website is a great reference used in the I think it's like win-win. I mean, I think it's a great addition. But as you've mentioned in the past on the podcast, it's like all these things like you might mention later, like adding the archive database. There's all these things we've done over the years that it's like they all add to it, and but in a way that benefits some of the other parts of the archive. So it's just I think it was a great fit. But
Well, yeah,
I think
you're-
also your style fits the culture of the archive.
Yes.
It's not one of these regimented podcasts that has like a
no.
really strict schedule and it has to be like super high quality production editing,
Yep.
all that kind of stuff. Like
It's funny because I like Jimmy Mack, like personally, like I've known him for a while. But when I sent him the demo, he said, oh, Sky, and he's got a radio voice. Oh, it sounds really good and everything. I mean, obviously, it's not going to be like that in the final version. I remember being like, oh, yeah, no, this definitely whatever you heard in there sucks. And I can do something better than this for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, the archive's been around 30 years, and you guys have been around almost half of that. So it's a credit to you. I mean, that's early
Yeah.
days of podcasting, more or less.
Yeah.
When I just think of Sky, like you're really like what became, at least for me in those early days, like the bones of the podcast was your old Rebel Scum threads where I think you just called it Nugget from the Archive. I'm like, well, that's a great format that's adapted into and it's like Gus was saying, they feed one another. So yeah.
And that's what's so wild. And I talk a lot about this in the, Star Wars collecting sucks now versus being good now. But like, I was so nervous to even post in rebelscum.com because I didn't think I had enough like weight or name to myself that even after being there for like 3 or 4 years, I would be really hesitant to start a new post and start a new thing because like I didn't want to be taking up too much space. I didn't want to be like, look at me, look at me. And then it's just so wild now with Facebook where it's just like, look at me, like it's just so quick and so instant. So yeah, like I had the idea for the Nugget for the archive way before, but I felt too
Right.
sheepish. Like I can't like bring this out. Like who am I to even, so
No.
yep, I'm defined by my modesty, Steve. That's the best thing about me. So, yes, which brings us to I would say that the Kivecast was sort of the rough beginnings of the idea of the Archive 2.0.
Yeah.
Which Steve, what I mean, was is it your idea? Was it my idea? Was it Ron's? Was it whose idea was to call it the Archive 2.0?
I think
think it was-
that terminology is definitely you. The
Ah,
the
damn it.
idea
It's so
for
stupid.
the
I'm
for
sorry,
the
everybody.
for the
My
concept.
first
No,
memory
that
of it
yeah
is you talking about it when we were driving to one of the ice events.
yeah.
Mhm.
You were wanted to pitch Gus on. I was like on the idea, and it was like to loop the podcast more into the site somehow on the main page, and also put a blog in there. And I remember it being your idea, Sky. And then you talked to Gus about it when we were down there, and he said the same thing he probably told you with the podcast. He's like, "Yeah, go for it." And then
Yeah.
like,
Well,
And also redesign of the
yeah.
gateway page and all that, which I think was much needed revamping at the time.
And I just at the time I couldn't figure out how we were gonna like how is the blog gonna be advertised on the site. And I think it was your idea, Sky, to have the thumbnails in the middle of the page there, and
Yeah.
to have, and then Barth figured out how to
Yeah.
have an update with the things, and it's great. I still really like it. It's been 10 years, but I really like going to swca.com and seeing the blog post right there, and I can click on them and it takes you to the blog. It's been great, and I think the blog, we've had some great things on the blog for sure. Like a lot of great people have contributed.
killer stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really what we wanted to do, was to, because, like Gus said, the great thing about the archive is you can go 2.5 years without doing anything on it. But there's enough people who want to do stuff to it, and there just wasn't a place to give them space to do it. I remember what my pitch line was: the Archive 2.0, bringing the archive into the 20th century. I believe that was my that was my pitch.
Yeah, that
Well,
sounds
well,
right. Yeah.
To me, like Gus and I were talking about the special feature earlier, which was sort of like an early version of the
Kind of a
blog.
precursor. Yeah.
Yeah, much more unwieldy. So it's way easier to, if someone wants to write an article, to publish it on the blog, or even to do, if they wanted to do like a chart or like a list of like all the stuff that was released. Like, so I think the blog has sort of supplanted the old special feature, and it's kind of been better in the sense that it's way more flexible. And, it's like Jonathan McElwain's writing cool stuff. And, we've had a lot of cool people come in and do stuff, and it's really been really good. There has not been I don't think it's even debatable. There's not been a better source of like in-depth vintage Star Wars collecting content over the last 10 years than that blog. There's no magazines anymore. And, it's just kind of the source. Other people are doing certain things on blogs, but I think ours is really good. I think it's been really good.
I agree. And I think a lot of the blog stuff it's original. There's stuff on other sites and places and on social media, but I feel like a lot of it's topics I've seen before. Whereas the blog, it's like at this stage, like we're, veterans have been doing this for decades. It's like there's a lot of stuff in the blog. It's like, wow, that's novel.
Yeah.
Someone's
Yeah.
on this stuff
Yeah.
recently. Like, damn, I collect food stuff and I haven't seen some of that before.
Gus is right. There's
impressive.
been some stuff on there that's like not going over, well-trod territory, but just sort of like blazing a new trail with stuff. And it's
Yeah.
something justifiably to be proud of for sure.
Which is funny because I'm a YouTube guy, right? Like that's my main hobby and with the music stuff, but I've never really looked at YouTube for Star Wars collectors, like Star Wars collecting, but like so much of it, and I'm not speaking to anyone in particular, I'm not starting any kind of beef because I haven't watched any of it, but the stuff that I've seen on my periphery is all like the wackiest Star Wars toys. And I'm like, is that just going to be like a watered down version of Ron? Yep, it's a watered down version of Ron's
Well,
talk.
yeah, there's people on YouTube who kind of mine archive stuff, and it's like, and there's been people who tell me we should be really upset about it. And yeah, okay, someone's basically stealing your stuff and only crediting it in a very minor way. But I don't know if Gus would agree, but my experience is that people have been lifting stuff from the archive from the start
Yeah.
and rarely attributing it. And it's like, I see stuff even on TV, like I will watch like there'll be a brief like CNN thing about like Star Wars collecting, and it's like whoever put it together grabbed like images. And I was like, that's my X-wing from the archive. Someone just went and Googled it and pulled the picture. So it's like,
Yeah.
all right, that's been happening since the beginning, where it's like I see my content or our content, and it's just been lifted for something else. And it's just part of being like at the center of the hobby. It's just like I don't know if you can avoid being copycatted in that way. Although sometimes it's very blatant, in sort of
Yeah.
a way that makes you uncomfortable, but it's just,
Yeah.
imitation is the best form of flattery is a cliche, but it's also kind of true.
The only way
Yeah.
we could fix it, Steve, is if we switched to entirely a YouTube channel and just took all of the old articles and did kind of, you know,
I mean,
but
there have been multiple times where I've posted an article and like 2 months later, I'll see someone on YouTube and it's basically summarizing the article, and there will be like a very inconsequential credit where it's like, okay, this guy just kind of regurgitated my stuff, but all right.
Yeah.
I mean, what are you gonna
Yeah.
do? I'm glad
Yep.
someone's
Yeah.
reading it, I guess.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
just
people,
think
people just, yeah, I mean, people steal content so much of this, but it's like, I do think that the people who are knowledgeable in the hobby, a lot of collectors, they figure out who's really doing the work and
Yeah.
who's ripping off the stuff. So like, and as we said, like, we do this because we love it. It's not, I think it was, to me, what's kind of fascinating on it and almost comical about it is there are a lot of people that do things like YouTube because they want to get internet fame and they're in this influencer culture and all this kind of stuff. And we really don't give a shit about that.
Yeah, that's-
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah, that's
It's like, so they rip us off. Go for it. Go
Yeah.
get your internet fame from ripping
it's
off my
like-
content because we really don't care, But
I mean, and there are people,
Yeah.
particularly one of the YouTube guys I'm thinking of, that people who are really upset about him, and that's just like, and they try to enlist me, and I'm just like, whatever. I mean, it's lame, and I
yeah.
don't get that upset about it. Like Gus said, like I put it out there, it's free for people to read, and I never made money on it or intended to make money on it. I'm flattered that other people are influenced by it. I would prefer a more obvious attribution, but at the end of the day, I've seen my stuff and other stuff from other people stolen so often that it's really, I mean, whatever. You just kind of par for the course.
And if you ever want to know how much money they make, I can tell you how it all breaks down on YouTube. It's
Yeah.
probably not a lot.
Yeah, you're
Um,
probably right.
And then Steve, what is this? Steve put a picture of the guy from Taxi next to the guy from Doc Hollywood.
It's-
What is this, Steve?
I mean, it's more of just like where do we all see this going in the future? Like, where would you guys like it to go? Where do you think it might go? And then just it's crazy. Like, time is passing so quickly. I can't believe that the blog is already 10 years
10
old,
years,
or the podcast is going to be approaching 15 years. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, I don't know. I just, in terms of what we've all kind of had similar discussions about, like, where we would like to see the site to go. But
I'm
what do
pretty sure
you-
that's John Wooten creeping around the corner in the. I'll never listen to this, so I can make that joke. He won't even
But wait,
know.
doesn't Jason Smith actually cosplay as that guy?
Yeah, you're right. The guy
You're
does.
right. Yeah.
And that's Biff from Back to the Future. That was my little joke there. I was trying to credit the actors from yeah. We could play a game of how many Christopher Lloyd movies can you name? Ron, name another Christopher Lloyd movie.
Oh, come on, man. Let's not do the trivia. Just
All
go
right,
on.
I win.
You do. You won.
You won. Where does it go? I mean, I would love. I mean, I do think at some point we need to, with the archive, like ideally, like start to enlist, new generation of people. But I think, we have to. We're working on some things with the anniversary to try to expand it, take it in some new directions, modernize some things in it, but keep its original quirkiness. I think there's a lot of content we need to. I mean, we're sitting on so much good content we haven't even published yet, and so that's one of my priorities, trying to get more of that out there, because we actually have a lot of unique content that has never been put on the archive before. So yeah,
Can you tease a little bit of that, Gus?
with that, sort of tease a little. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff we've shared on social media just in snippets, and then there are things sitting in our collections that we just have never posted. And so I think that there's just so much room for more things we've just because we've been busy, just haven't posted. That I personally am going to I've been starting to trickle out a whole bunch of stuff. And so that's sort of one priority. But yeah, I mean, I just think we haven't, the last couple of years we haven't published as much. And so really trying to step that up, really get that so that we get more eyeballs on some of the things we've been doing. But we've started in the past year, started to get much more content out there. I would like to enlist also experts from different countries and get some more depth in international. That's something I want to work on is because there is some interest from people in different countries to just really get, when you get domain experts from different countries, that can really flesh out some of the areas. And that's one thing I found from travels when I go visit collectors in different countries. Well, we might think, there are generalists in, a lot of collectors in the US, and we think, oh, you get these collectors that specialize, but you need specialists everywhere in collecting. It's not just by category, it's also by country. People that live in the different countries just know about so much stuff that we don't know about in your own country. And so I really want to tap those resources and help with the archive as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many areas to go in, like even thinking like Yehuda was working with all those like Indonesian comic book collectors and all that kind of stuff, like just
Yeah.
as like a small, and Steve and I did our Iceland and Yugoslavian collectibles thing, and that was just a blast. And we
Yeah.
aren't even experts, but we were able to talk about it for a couple hours.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any, I'm on board with Gus's vision on that. I don't have anything super to add about long-term stuff, but that all sounds pretty good. But in the near future, Steve and I have been working with Yehuda too, trying to put together, people have sent us some retrospectives of the site, and we're going to publish those on the archive. I guess probably, well, Dave Quinn, who's a new blogger for us, did his own retrospective that's up now, and I guess we'll let that run, and then maybe start in August 1 or something, putting up the other stuff. But I've been working on my own little retrospective, so be looking for that. Like, that'll be on the blog, and we'll put it on the Facebook page. But beyond that, just excited for especially blog stuff. I know Yehuda's working on a big thing about sun catchers, I think, and I'm sure Jonathan
Sounds like
McElwain
Yehuda.
told me he's got several really interesting topics, and I've got some topics. Certainly looking for collectors to do more in-depth reviews of things in the blog format, as well as to go back to Gus's point about just doing more database entries.
Yeah.
And I know Brock Walker sent me some stuff, but I reached out to several big vintage collectors and asked them, hey, why don't you send me some good photos and descriptions of some of the things on that you want. But people are older now, and there's other forums to showcase your stuff, so it's harder to get people. But if you do have especially unique premium items like props and prototypes that are, especially things that are not on the site, if like there's already a mold of this or that, like just because you have a similar, we don't necessarily need duplicates, but like unique stuff, like, yeah, please hit me up, and I'll get those things on there.
And it doesn't have to be super fancy prototypes, right? It can be
no, it
like
could be
a
interesting
different
things,
flavor
yeah.
of Jedi Lask soda or
Right.
something.
Right.
It can
Yeah.
be some random
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. So I just always look forward to like seeing what people contribute, especially to the blog, because there's been some really cool things on there. And I just like when because Jonathan McElwain's a guy who has like a collecting knowledge that I don't have, so it's really always interesting to see him put together something. He did something on Coke, so you guys did a podcast episode.
Yeah, we did.
It's just stuff like that really kind of is what excites me about the site, and so future things like that are definitely things I'm looking forward to.
And the other thing I'd add is like, with the archive, like to expect a vision from us is kind of a tall order, right? It's always been kind of organic anyway. So like, my guess is like 30 years from now we'll be, well, we are, if anything about us is like about longevity, right? So we'll keep it going, but it'll be organic, right? It'll be whatever turns come, and so but we're in it for the long haul. But yeah, who knows which directions we'll go.
Not to boast our own horn, but be boastful or to toot our own horns, but I expect that in the near future, at least, again, like I said, I don't know about 30 years from now, but in the near future, I expect it to remain the best source for interesting vintage Star Wars content. I don't see us going away. I don't think anybody's sitting there thinking we should throw in the towel. So I think it's going to keep
No.
going. And hopefully
Now-
you guys keep doing podcasts and that doesn't go away because I was worried there for a little while.
Oh yeah, no, you should have been worried, but we're back at it. We're just maybe not every month, but most months, right, Steve?
Yeah, I think we gotta just apply the traditional archive mentality of,
Yes.
you know, don't
Just the-
hold yourself to anything too, but know that it's coming. We're not going anywhere.
And I was sort of wondering, like, maybe redefining, like, can we invent a new name for an era? Like, can we do 95 to 2012, like, as you know,
Ugh.
modern pre-Disney? Because like
He's
I
Gus just told you that he like pioneered the vintage terminology, and now you're
Yes.
trying to throw him under the
Yes.
bus.
Well, I'm trying to come up with something new because, like, as an example, like I was in Korea in 2007 and found a bootleg comic book that is in the Star Wars format. I don't know what it is or what it means, and it doesn't have a place in the archive because it's from like 2007. But like at this point, maybe we should open up to rarities and interesting stuff, you know, before 2012. But I'm not getting a lot of enthusiasm out of this, Steve. I don't know. I'm looking around here.
There is some, you know, modern stuff on the site. I don't
Yeah.
think it's
It
It is.
is.
It has to pass the sniff test. I guess that's what it is.
I think one topic might be a good topic for a future episode would be how things, what names get adopted, what don't, and how naming gets adopted. Like there, I'll just tease as a few nuances, like um unproduced toy, which we've used around, like Ron uses, I use it, and then became people saying unreleased. It's actually an unreleased toy,
Yeah.
not an unproduced toy. And I'm just like, who gives a shit? Just whatever. Like, it's the same thing. It doesn't matter, right? Or then the new one is like pre-production. They're not prototype. And like, okay, call it pre-production. But like, we always knew prototype was a misnomer, but the kids these days say pre-production. But it's like it's all the same. So there are these terms where people like split hairs, but then there's also like there's also attempts to coin something. Like there was a point where people tried to call the Hasbro era stuff neoclassic or something, and it just didn't stick. So people gave up
Right.
on the term. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in lexicon, but then there are things like UDE, which CJ termed, which just stuck. It was so good, like a great term for the unproduced droids and Ewoks. Because instead of saying unproduced droids and Ewoks, UDE is just perfect. You know, like so. I don't know. I think it's an interesting topic of like how some stuff sticks, like vintage or UDE, and then some stuff just, you know, and then some stuff gets dated, like makes it sound like old guys by saying unproduced or something.
Right. And
It's
like,
really
when do
hard to
people
force
stop
a
saying
term.
troopies? You know, because they used to always say troopies. Remember that, Steve?
Oh yeah, I remember those
Yeah.
days.
And then Stormy,
really hard
yeah, then
to
the people
force
that
a
say
term.
Stormy or Pew Pew or something.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's really hard to force people to use terms like Gus. I think that's kind of partly what
Yeah.
Gus was meaning. It's just like
Yeah.
hard to figure out. It's very organic and just like just CJ though has been really good with that. Like I remember because he also came up, I think, with double telescoping, which still is used, you know,
Yeah.
years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've seen other people try to, you know, get people to behind this or that term and not succeed, like troopies, which hopefully
I was to say, we have someone on this call that is guilty of doing just that.
I was this close to getting
Yeah,
that to
you-
work.
so close.
I was so close. Yeah.
Yeah, or with the coins, like I just made it up. It said category 1 through 5 and it stuck. But others have tried to come up with new ways to name the coin things. It hasn't stuck. You know, so anyway, it's a topic for another day. But like how there's an art to it, which is like sort of, it has to be a little bit organic, but then there's sort of, you know, a concise name to it. But it's kind of been a fun related thing to the archive, because we've actually had a pretty good track record, as and CJ does too, of like naming things that have actually stuck with the hobby, and then but not all attempts to do that by people have been successful.
yeah.
So I have been thinking about more things just going forward. So, you know, you're talking about the slippery slope, which of course Steve was just thinking about the slope on Mustafar, and you've got the high ground and stuff. I could see him thinking about it. But you know, you were talking about like the slippery slope of different kinds of variations, and definitely the snobbery of the archive means that the archive is not a particularly good place to go for figure variations, and people end up going to like Imperial Gunnery, or they like jump around. Like, should maybe there be an overture to those less, like those sites which are a little bit like less seen now, and just sort of say, give us all your stuff. Like, right? Because like the Imperial Gunnery's Guide to Variations is totally comprehensive, I believe, right? And like that should be on the archive so that it can always be found, because the Imperial Gunnery might not always be around, but their work is good. And just because, you know, I don't think that, I still don't understand what a red bar is. I've been told like 20 times. I don't understand what it is, but there's a red bar and that's worth a lot. Anyways, that's maybe an idea to like sort of scoop up some of the information that has been determined to be not worthy of the archive, because maybe it is.
I don't know if we ever determined it wasn't worthy. It was just
No one
we
cared.
weren't necessarily interested. So, but
Yeah.
I mean, if one of those guys had wanted to put something together, the problem is always like how to format it and host it. It's now that we have the blog, it's easier to do it as a blog post.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be against someone writing a thing about variations and putting it out there and hosting it, like probably on the blog. It's just, I don't know. I mean, my guess is I don't know the Imperial Gunnery guys necessarily, but my guess is they're pretty proud of what they built on their own site, and
Yeah, that's awesome.
they probably don't necessarily want it on the archive. But
And I'll do a YouTube video reading their site, and then we'll put it on the archive.
But yeah, I don't think we've ever been against unique takes. Although there have been times, I think Gus mentioned earlier about shooting down ideas that were too esoteric, and I've probably erred. Like I remember, I want to say Bill Wills and Tracy Hamilton reaching out and wanting to do a thing on baggy variations years ago, and it ended up being on the archive later. But I was like, man, that's just too. I mean, it's neat that you guys put, but that's just like too esoteric. But what do I know? Because people are obsessed with that stuff now. So they were right and I was wrong. But I don't know if we've ever been like dismissive of people who wanted to go deep into something. It's more of a how to integrate it with the site, and then because a lot of times they have all these grand ideas, and it's like, well, that we're not. There's never going to be a way that we can code that to get that in there. So
yeah, well,
that's
it's
a difficult get.
I think,
you know,
to your point on that, I mean, like Yehuda's put together, I would say, similar incredibly deep dives on
Right.
something where he has like over 100 photos, and you know,
With
we
the
were
blog,
able
it's
to
easier.
put it
Yeah.
in there. It's easier to
Like,
do
I
it, but
remember
it's
years
still a
ago,
lot.
someone wanted us to host the Kellerman Matrix, and this is before the blog.
Mhm.
And one, there was a whole issue with whether John wanted that, and it wasn't clear to me that he did.
Yeah.
And then it was like, how do we get that on the site and have it easily updatable? And it just wasn't a way to do it easily. Now that we have the blog, I think you could do something like that, and you could have it update easily. So yeah, I'm not against doing stuff like that. I just, you know, personally, I don't know that much about figure variation, so it's not going to come from me. Someone else
Yeah.
would have to write it.
I mean, a lot of it's really, yeah, if somebody does the work, like if it's simple for us to port it, great, then it's easy. Like we'll do an esoteric thing, but if it's a lot of work, it's like, you know, and it's a real esoteric topic, that's going to make it harder for us.
Yeah, like another person approached me with like redoing the whole multi-pack, like the catalog multi-pack matrix, which like I said, put together, was like the first one out there, and it was like, yeah, his ideas were solid, like, yeah, it would be better, but it was just like, do you have any idea the amount of work to overhaul this thing? And it's like, you know what, it's fine, like it stands well on its own. It's pretty usable. I'm not gonna invest hundreds of hours in doing this over. It's just too difficult. And I had to explain to the person, I was like, you have to realize that the whole thing is coded by hand, like, so it's like a text document that is HTML, like I'm writing it. And he was like, are you kidding? I'm like, no, it's all like hand jammed, like I'm just typing text. Like, I think he thought it was like I'm using some complicated thing. I was like, yeah, so what you're asking is beyond my capabilities, and I'm not hiring someone to do it, and you don't know how to do it either. So, I mean, it's kind of stay how it is. I'm sorry.
That's maybe the way that we were the most true to the archive when we started, is that up until the break, the reason that the archive, that the Kivecast stopped is because GarageBand stopped supporting the podcast feature in 2014, and I was still using GarageBand 13 in 2022. And so I was screwing up my computers. And because I still write all the code in order to put it onto iTunes and everything. Like I'm still doing code.
Upset. He would be very upset to hear that Apple dropped the ball on that particular.
Yes. So yeah, so I still write code for every episode that we put up. So, you know,
It's
I'm not
a lot of work. People, you know, I mean, not complaining, but it's a lot of work. But to Steve's point, the blog, like we could do a lot of more complicated things on there. And if we need to update it with like, even if it's like monthly, like it's not that hard. So that, yeah. So if someone wanted to do something like, I want to write like the ultimate guide to loose figure variations, although I mean that would probably be an epically long blog post given how that topic is, but we could potentially do something like that. Although, you know, having Steve and myself, you probably have to grant them access directly so they can go in there and build it
Yeah,
themselves.
it's that fine line between like database and like web
Article.
magazine format, you know.
Yeah,
that
that's why I
we're-
like, you know, Steve and I gave, like, we made Yehuda and Jonathan bloggers because they had grand ideas to do blog posts, and it was like, just poor Steve, I think, put together one of Yehuda's epically long things, and it's just like, man, this is dumb. Why don't you just let Yehuda get in there himself and do it, you know? So it's like, then he can kind of set it up however he wants.
Yeah.
I would say while we're on the topic that, like, if there are any friends in the archive who, you know, have web development skills, like, please reach out to us, because we that's one area where we, you know, could really use additional assistance. Like, I would think it would help us on, there's a bunch of stuff we want to do where we could use, you know, use to, you know, to revamp a bunch of our pages, because we have some ideas of things we want to do. So
Yeah,
That's
because
Good plug.
all beyond my capabilities. So yeah, I mean, happy, that would be great if someone refresh some of that stuff.
yeah, unfortunately, Lobart is too busy. I'd asked him a bunch of times, but he's too busy.
Well,
So
he did great
he,
for us 10
he
years
did
ago.
he
Yeah.
has done so much. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, so
unsung hero,
yeah,
Lobart.
well, he's pretty
Yeah.
sung, but yeah. So whoever wants to be the next Lobart, come on, you know. That's what we need. Well, anyways, I think, you know, Steve, this is the beginning of the Archive 3.0, and it seems like basically each time it hits a new stage, it gets a little bit lighter, a little bit more open to more people, right? That's seems what it's going to be like. We don't know how open, right? It's not just going to be like anyone does anything, but that seems like that's where it's going. And we'll be right here on a semi-monthly basis to catalog it.
Yeah.
It's awesome, exciting.
Yeah, cool. So Steve, is this our show?
I think we did it. Yeah.
Did we? Awesome. So wait, how do we even end our shows now that we just do them like this lifestyle? Because Ron and Gus are still there, so we can just
Yeah.
we'll just do it then. I'll just say the thing I always say, and then you say the thing you always say, and they can just kind of sit there. Wampa
As long as we don't
wampa.
hang around for the baseball, that's all good.
Oh my God, the baseball. Oh wait, Steve, who won the game? So Steve went to a Red Sox Dodgers game.
geez.
The Dodgers swept the Red Sox for the first time I can ever think of. So
Wow.
that was, yeah. So sorry, but no.
Yeah, it's okay. I mainly watch soccer now. I'm just becoming completely insufferable. So becoming
You know, see that's the 3.0 is the soccer is gonna
exactly
supplant-
international.
This guy's
supplant
trying to pretend he
baseball.
hasn't always been insufferable since.
Yes, exactly.
So like, it's
I
like
missed-
that's like your trademark is insufferableness. not
Yes.
stupidity, but being insufferable.
Yeah, all right. Wampa wampa.
All right,
Adios.
guys.
Thank you guys.